of things happening in the world. Love to get your thoughts and comments to whatever's on your mind, actually, whether it be the haka in the Parliament yesterday, the hikoi heading to Parliament, or what's happening perhaps on an international front. Focusing now, though, on the impact of Trump's re-election as President of the United States, his new administration, the impact that this will have on the world of geopolitics, in particular focusing in on areas of conflict in and around Israel and, of course, Ukraine. Joining me on the program now from the Democracy Project, Geoffrey Miller. Geoffrey, kia ora, thanks for your time today.
Good morning, Andrew.
With the re-election of Trump, I suppose things are a little bit up in the air. Now, whether you support Trump or not, certainly his track record shows that that things may change over the next 4 years. It may be, it's certainly going to be an interesting watch. But what's your initial thoughts on the impact of his re-election and some of the people that he's appointing to be a part of his team?
Yeah, it's certainly fascinating. If you recall, the last time around in the Trump administration, we didn't end at all with the same team that we started with. Rex Tillerson, for example, was the inaugural Secretary of State. We ended up with Mike Pompeo, and that was actually one of the more stable cabinet roles in the Trump administration, and there were plenty of other ructions, if your listeners will recall. This time around, I think Trump wants to run a slightly more professional operation. That's the general vibe that we're getting from the team, I guess. And he appointed a chief of staff quite early on, Susie Wiles, and he's come out quite early on with a list of cabinet picks. It's been much earlier this time around than last time, when I guess the Trump campaign just wasn't prepared for winning. And this time it seems that they were, and they've had these picks ready to go out quite quickly within the first week. So we've now got a list of a dozen names or more, and there are more coming out every day of Donald Trump's top cabinet picks. And when it comes to foreign policy, you've got Marco Rubio as Secretary of State, and Mike Waltz, who will be the National Security Advisor, and Pete Hegseth, who will be the Secretary of Defense. I guess those are the main picks. But then even you've got the US Ambassador to Israel, who will be Mike Huckabee. So if you pick apart some of those names, I think it's quite interesting to see where they come from. Rubio and Waltz are very much China hawks. They're very much in the category of, we're not so interested in what happens in Ukraine. We're very pro-Israel, and we need to stand behind Israel. But really, we need to be making our focus of taking on China. And I think that will be a theme. It's interesting because that's also a theme that we've seen from previous administrations, including Democratic ones, including the Biden administration. They came in and said it was all going to be about the Indo-Pacific. But then things happened along the way. And with the Biden administration, it was very much the war in Ukraine, war in Gaza, and it dragged them in both situations and left an almighty mess, which probably is one reason why Joe Biden, and then obviously dropped out of the race, and then Kamala Harris failed to win. It was probably one of the factors, the foreign policy side of things that they had to deal with.
Let's look at those two big ones then, and firstly with Ukraine, because Trump made some quite bold promises when he was running for office that, hey, look, I'll get this sorted out by text message over the weekend. Well, not quite, but certainly saying that he would bring a stop to the war in Ukraine, that he's, because of his relationship with Putin, that he would do some type of deal that would, I suppose, stop America's involvement there, stop the war, bring peace to that part of the world. Any thoughts or theories as to what that plan might be and how credible it could be?
Yeah, I think I think an end to the war in Ukraine is very much on the cards. I think that would be the case whether it was a Kamala Harris victory or a Donald Trump victory, as has transpired. That's because wars simply don't go on forever. They either end with a comprehensive victory for one side, or they end up with a negotiated settlement. We're coming up to the 3rd anniversary of the war, and increasingly it looks like a stalemate. Russia is making some small, to some degree, significant gains on
With
the
significant
battlefield.
losses at the same
With
time, though.
significant
Yeah,
losses. I
yeah,
was just going to add that they're losing around 1,500 men a day, which is not sustainable in the long term. When you look at support from the West, it is fading.
yeah,
You certainly don't see even in the New Zealand context, you don't see the Ukraine flags flying around that you once did. And when you look at the political context in the United States, they passed a huge funding bill back in April. It was about $95 billion. 60 billion was for Ukraine, and you'll find that a lot of that didn't actually go to Kiev, but still quite a bit of it did.
yeah.
Quite a lot of that allocation went to US defense manufacturers to build up their stocks, etc., that they had used already. But still quite a lot of money has gone to Ukraine, and a lot of that's now being dispersed at the moment, the
Yeah.
remaining billions from that package. But once it's gone, it's gone. And it was very hard to get that package through. The only thing that really saved it in the end was a ban on TikTok, or a potential ban
Yeah.
on TikTok, which is Chinese owned. And if the reason that the war can't go on forever from Ukraine's perspective is if they don't have the weapons, they don't have the money,
Yeah.
then they don't have the ability to fight the war. Now, the Europeans are coming to the party to some degree with money, but I don't think I don't think it's possible for Europe on its own to bankroll Ukraine to victory here and to supply it with the weapons that it would need. I think in the short term, perhaps there will be an escalation still in the war, and I think that goes for the wars in the Middle East as well,
Yeah.
because you've got this kind of lame duck period with Joe Biden in the White House for another couple of months before Trump takes over. But I think come January 20, when Donald Trump is set to take over the White House, I think largely everything will be wound up, will be winding down,
Yeah.
perhaps is a better way of putting it,
Now,
in Ukraine and in the Middle East. I don't think you'll probably have a conclusive end at that point, but I think actors see the writing on the wall. They see a new US administration, and they'll be looking to wrap things up and come to some kind of negotiated settlement. So that means ceasefire in Lebanon and Gaza, and it means a ceasefire to some degree in Ukraine, and some kind of peace plan.
given the, well, at least perceived perception of Donald Trump's close relationship with Putin, some commentators are saying that hey, if the US is involved in bringing about peace in Ukraine, that's not going to be in Ukraine's favor. It's not likely to be a deal that that they will like. And of course, these are sovereign nations that we're talking about. Trump may put a deal on the table. Both parties, or neither party, needs to accept it.
I don't think either side will really like the deal that is ultimately worked out. I think there will be a negotiated settlement, and I think it will involve something along the lines of a pathway to NATO membership for the western part of Ukraine.
Yeah.
And Russia will probably annex that 20% of Ukraine that it currently holds, roughly, in the east, in the Donbass. So I think that's probably what it will work out to be. And there'll be some buffer zone in the middle, potentially patrolled by European troops.
Yep.
We'll wait and see. But I don't think either side will like that. I don't think Vladimir Putin will be happy with a NATO presence on his doorstep. That's why he started the war in the first place.
Yes. Yeah.
I don't think Ukraine will be happy about giving up 20% of their territory. But in the end, that's what compromises, I guess, are about. It's something that you're not entirely happy with, but you have to live with. And the status quo is just not tenable to continue on with the war in the intensity that is being currently fought.
Just wanting to touch on the Israel-Gaza situation, and as you say, it's not just Israel-Gaza; it also involves Lebanon and Iran, and it over recent months has looked like it could expand. Again, from a Trump point of view, a strong pro-Israel stance, perhaps stronger than the Democrat administration. Interesting that that American Arabs voted strongly for Trump. In fact, for some people say that it would have had a significant influence on the outcome, certainly in some districts.
Yeah, in some of the swing states, particularly Michigan, Michigan has the highest Arab American population, the Arab American diaspora and voters there were very angry uh, in some quarters with Joe Biden. Jill Stein, who was the Green Party candidate, actually did best in Michigan.
Wow.
And particularly when that was her best performing
Okay.
state,
Yep.
and they're the best performing areas for her, particularly in a place called Dearborn, which is very much an Arab American stronghold. And so there was a lot of anger towards Joe Biden for what has unfolded in the last year in the Middle East, particularly Gaza, with the death toll now up to 43,000, the vast majority of those women and children, civilians. So they punished Biden. I think voters also knew that Donald Trump was not necessarily going to be in their interests, because, as you say, Donald Trump is even more pro-Israel, arguably, than the Democrats are, and certainly some of the people that he's appointing, and like Mike Huckabee from the evangelical wing, who's very, very committed to Israel. He wants to see Israel annex the West Bank. He sees settlements as a good thing, and when you look at the other figures that Donald Trump's appointing, they're very much lockstep behind Israel. So they're not getting probably a better situation than the Biden administration, but the Biden administration was pretty feeble, you have to say, in the last year, given everything that's transpired. So you can understand their anger and frustration.
The situation in Gaza is, well, you could say is wrapping up, but certainly Hamas don't have much fight left in them, some commentators would say, but the threat of escalation, continuing certainly into Lebanon, but in other parts of the world today. What's your thoughts on that with a pro-Israel administration in the US? Are things likely to escalate, or is peace in the Middle East more possible, albeit on Israel's terms?
Yeah, I think, look, in the short term, as I said earlier, because you've got a lame duck administration, Joe Biden, why would you stop now if you're Israel, when you can destroy some more of Hamas's infrastructure, more Hezbollah's infrastructure, and Israel's been striking targets in Syria overnight as well, elsewhere in the Middle East. Look, I think the war will get worse before it gets better. But then I think you will see the ceasefire. There are already sort of feelers coming out from Hamas that they do want a ceasefire. There was a political figure from Hamas interviewed overnight saying that Hamas is ready for a ceasefire. The formal talks have broken down. Qatar withdrew from the mediation because things were going so badly. But I think at some point you will end up with that ceasefire at that level in Lebanon and Gaza. And yet I think you will see wider escalation when it comes to Trump and a lot of the people around him. I think they see Iran as the head of the snake, if you like, and they will be wanting to focus on Iran's nuclear program and Iran's role in the conflicts in the Middle East. And so I think they'll be arguing we need to finish up Gaza, Lebanon, so forth, and focus on the bigger threat, which is Iran. And I don't think you can rule out anything at this point. There's been talks with Saudi Arabia in the background going on with Israel, even as this war has been going on. And there is some talk that there might be another big deal waiting in the wings, a normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And Saudi Arabia has made the price of that a Palestinian state. And you might think, well, Donald Trump's never going to do that. But yet he is known for his deal making. And if you go back to the first term, the Abraham Accords was one of the big foreign policy successes of his administration, when the likes of the UAE, Bahrain, for example, normalized their relations with Israel. So I don't think you can rule out anything, perhaps a normalization deal with Saudi Arabia that even gives a Palestinian state, but then it will be at the price of focusing solely on Iran as the much greater threat. And there's no love lost between a lot of the Gulf states and Iran. So maybe they can all find common cause there.
A common enemy in that regard. And certainly a clear mandate for the Republicans, not just for the presidency, but for other parts of the government structure in the United States. They have the mandate to take some bold actions on this one, and certainly and international influence for their policies as well. Geoffrey, a complicated issue. Thank you for helping us get our head around what may be happening next. Thanks for your time today.
Thanks, Andrew.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.